Today to protest against the CAS review and specifically to make our voice heard on the discussion that's happening later regarding trans healthcare for kids in Wales. The CAS review recently came out, and that is something that's been discussed in great detail in the press, and unfortunately a lot of it is missing critical thinking and input from trans people, of all things. So, the CAS review promotes conversion therapy, simple as, at the moment. There is no ifs and buts about it. It is out of scope. It does not address the needs of trans kids appropriately. It encroaches on the space of trans care for adults by specifically addressing 18 to 25-year-olds in order to take away their medication and force them to detransition. Out of 102 studies on puberty blockers and hormones, only 2 was included by the CAS review team. The CAS team decided that the WPATH guidelines were up to a standard, but completely ignored them, despite them being the worldwide authority on transgender care. She decided not to include these studies based on the fact that there's no blinding or double blinding or control group. And for anyone who knows anything about hormones, you can't double blind hormones. You will see the changes. There's no two ways about it. There's several graphs that have misled and intentionally misleading graphs where it supposedly shows the escalation in referrals of trans kids. However, it does not show later on the graph that it actually plateaus and doesn't get any higher. The report recommends that children's services should continue up to those of the age 25. I don't think children are 25 years old, as far as I know, considering that we can, join the army at 16. I think being able to take control of our care at 16 is completely acceptable. The idea, there's also this idea that the brain stops developing at 25. This is a myth that is continuing to perpetuate. Your brain continues to develop as you grow. It's just how humans are. Our brains get old as well. They can be better in some days than others. So it's frustrating knowing that this is supposedly a scientific, independent review, but very much promotes transphobia and conversion therapy in order to hurt trans people specifically and erase trans kids and erase hopes of trans kids in the UK. And currently, there was, a total of 100 and something kids on hormones that have been stopped? That total in the UK. And those are the kids that have worked through hoops and hoops of whether it be appointments, years of CAMs, or whatever it may be, for it to be ripped away from them, essentially. And more often than not, most of the people who end up on these waiting lists end up either aging out or going private. And currently there is so little few private options in the UK, and the UK is trying to make it harder specifically for trans kids to get private healthcare if needed, attacking the Gillett competency, which would also affect kids' access to birth control and other life-saving medication that they may need access to without the knowledge or consent of their fat parents. It's very much encroaching on children's autonomy, on the way they are allowed to dictate their care. It's so frustrating that the Welsh NHS has been waiting so long for the CAS review, and this is from meetings we've had with them in the Trans Wales Partnership, where they have told us they've been waiting for the CAS review. And not only that, have they said, when we asked essentially, what are you going to do if the CAS review is bad, we were essentially laughed off. Even though by then we had already proved that Tilly Langton was part of the CAS review, a noted conversion therapist. She is promoted gender exploratory therapy, which is another dog whistle for conversion therapy. It asks trans people to question their identity constantly and promoting resistance to any form of transition. It is a form of conversion practice. She was heavily involved in the CAS review. Ellen Morgan, who is the Health Minister, has not responded to family members' emails concerned about trans healthcare in Wales. This is from parents of trans kids, siblings of trans kids, and trans kids themselves. The LGBT Action Plan specifically promised to look into the possibility of opening a children's clinic. This isn't enough. They were told at multiple stakeholder groups to commit to opening a clinic. With only the promise of investigating the possibility, kids have years to wait, and the government to decide if they will or not. They are forced to have no access to healthcare because we are dilly-dallying on whether world-accredited evidence from the WPATH and other countries who have done this for years in better ways of taking care of trans kids in Wales. Currently, we refer them to NHS England, which costs NHS Wales more than it would to have a clinic here in Wales and do it that way. We are wasting taxpayer money by sending Welsh trans kids to a service that is currently not running. The current service does not exist anymore. They closed Tavistock. They are not accepting any new referrals, which means where do trans kids go for healthcare? There is no NHS healthcare for trans kids in the UK currently. NHS Wales has basically shrugged its shoulders and left trans kids to suffer. It's so frustrating that this is still the only process that we have for trans kids after many years. We thank Helen Fitcher and the office, I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing, for being strong trans allies, and for not only speaking about adding amendments, but supporting families of trans kids. Chasing Ellen and Morgan regarding a lack of response to these families. Why is it constantly that we are waiting on NHS England and their reviews and their policies in order to do care in NHS Wales? Are we truly having devolved healthcare if we're so dependent on NHS England for so many facets of our healthcare? Trans kids are especially vulnerable. How are kids from unsupportive homes meant to get to places like in England? They're forced to travel all the way to Tavistock and have multiple appointments in order to even have the chance of puberty blockers. And it's ridiculous to expect kids without supportive parents or family members to help them with that. We do not have a process currently that will help trans kids who are in families that don't accept them. We don't have a process that in Wales where schools can go to service or anything if a trans kid is in distress or being abused or anything like that. More often than not, trans kids are forced to deal with the kind of bullying and with no support, no official support from healthcare or the council or the government. More often than not, we're hearing of cases where councils are retracting guidance because under pressure from hate groups who just want to see the elimination of trans kids. And that's the reality. More often than not, they will talk about the elimination of gender ideology. What does that mean? Gender ideology means trans people. It's just a dog whistle at the end of the day. They want to get rid of trans people. They don't believe that we should exist. They don't believe that we should have safety in public society. They don't believe that we should thrive and do anything, really. They don't believe that we should be in charge of our own healthcare. More often than not, we're having to jump through cis people's hoops and convince cis people for crumbs. The reality is, trans healthcare in the UK, in Wales, is not up to scrub. It can be better. It can be so much better. But frankly, the CAS review and what they're recommending the CAS review to be implemented is abuse. It's abuse against trans kids, it's abuse against trans people, and it will set back trans rights and trans healthcare, the fight for trans healthcare, decades. The CAS review is truly abominable. I can't stress that enough. There is talks about how for many centuries, trans people have been predominantly trans females, commonly presenting to adulthood. No evidence was supplied to support this assertion of gender bias, by the way. This was just complete headcraft. The report also recommends that people who are seeking private care should not. What are they meant to do? Not seek healthcare they need if the NHS doesn't offer it? NHS guidance clearly states you are still entitled to free care if you choose to pay for additional private care. The recommendation is a proposal to penalise young children who have sought private care because of the deficiency in the NHS offering. There is no mention of what would happen to trans children being forced to go through an unwanted puberty. Because the reality is puberty blockers are safe and reversible. They've been used for cis people, cis kids for decades. We have used it to stop precocious puberty, a well-known condition, and it is safe. It's a safe medication that we have used. The fact that we are arguing why it should be different for trans kids is nothing but pure discrimination. The reality is, trans kids should be given the choice, and puberty blockers gives them that choice. It allows them to choose when they feel comfortable the puberty they want to go through, whether that be the puberty that they were assigned at birth, or whether that be puberty through cross-sex hormones. I can't stress enough how abominable the CAS review is. There's a section on heights. If anyone there's the argument that supposedly that if you are a certain height that you're more likely to be a man, or if you're a certain height, like it's above 5'7", you're a man, and above 5'6", you're more likely to be a woman, which is just kind of like, A, what has this got to do with trans kids' healthcare? B, okay, what does this mean? We know that people come in all different shapes and sizes. I don't think regulating people's gender based on height is something that we should do. I mean, if we look at athletes, for example, there are always outliers. You know, athletes are not usually quite tall, muscular, and they won't fit the average definition. Are we going to discount them as not being women or men or the gender they describe themselves as? It's so close to, it's just gender phrenology. There's no other way to describe it. There's descriptions of like it's horrid. There's descriptions of playing with toys and things like that, like debunked science. There was a study that was quoted, which was written in Swedish. The Cass Review specifically, in their methodology, they had said that they would not include any non-English language reviews or evidence or studies. They had included a machine-translated version of a Swedish medical study. I don't have to tell people hopefully I don't have to tell people how, especially the Welsh government, how machine translation is terrible. I mean, if you've tried it from English to Welsh, you know how badly Google Translate messes up. It's not perfect. Imagine that on medical text. On top of that, Swedish medical text. It's not a language similar to English. It is very clear that the Cass Review has picked and chosen what fits their biases and fits their perspective in order to enforce conversion therapy on trans youth. It is frustrating because the Welsh government has promised that in statements that trans people will be taken care of in Wales. We're yet to see any legislative progression on this. The LGBT Action Plan does not go far enough. Looking into establishing a children's service is not getting a children's service. The thing is, we need a children's service now, not 6 months' time after an investigation or a year from now after a consultation. The reality is we have the evidence, we have what we need, we have the staff, we have people who are qualified to take care of trans kids in Wales, and yet there is no movement from NHS Wales. Why is the buck stopping? There's no other motive I can think of other than transphobia. We are literally spending more sending trans kids to England, so it's not an issue of cost. We are wasting time and money while trans kids are suffering. And furthermore, the Cass Review would make it worse for those kids. We are not trying to alleviate, we should be the NHS Wales should be compassionate. As it should be, it's a health service. I feel like this shouldn't be something we should have to argue. But it is so obscene that we are completely accepting, or the mainstream press in somewhat is completely accepting that the Cass Review is a good document, that it should be not questioned. The reality is, not just trans people are speaking out about this. The Cass Review has been rejected by places like New Zealand and Australia, by their healthcare bodies for how abhorrent it is. I just wish that we can see, that the Welsh government will see reason and realise that we need trans healthcare now. And it's frustrating that there's such a delay. Thank you.